My father stood in the doorway of the house I grew up in, his face red with rage, and screamed 4 words that would change everything. Get out and never come back. I was 26 years old, a software engineer with a good job, and I just told him I was getting engaged to Marcus, the man I loved. My father didn't approve. Marcus was black, I'm white, and my father apparently was a racist I'd never fully understood until that moment. So I left. I packed a bag, walked out of that house, and didn't look back. I blocked my parents' numbers, deleted them from social media, and built a life without them. 6 weeks later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was my mother calling from a hospital. Your father had a massive stroke. He's paralyzed on his left side. He can barely speak. He needs you. I stood in my apartment, phone in my hand, and realized I had a choice to make. The man who'd thrown me out of his life now needed me to save his. What I decided to do, and what I discovered when I walked into that hospital room, would teach my father a lesson about love, family, and consequences that he'd spend the rest of his life processing. The phone call from my mother came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was in a meeting reviewing code with my team. I normally didn't answer unknown numbers, but something made me step out of the conference room and pick up. Emily, my mother's voice was shaking. It's me. I'm calling from St. Mary's Hospital. Your father, he had a stroke this morning, a massive one. He's paralyzed on his left side and he can barely speak. The doctors say he needs intensive care and someone to help with his recovery. Emily, I know what happened between you two, but he's your father. He needs you. 6 weeks. That's how long it had been since my father had stood in the doorway and told me to get out and never come back. 6 weeks since I'd walked out with a hastily packed bag and the certainty that I'd never speak to him again. 6 weeks since Marcus had held me while I cried and told me that we'd build our own family, one based on love instead of hatred. And now, after 6 weeks of silence, my mother was asking me to come back. I can't help you, I said, and my voice was steadier than I felt. Dad made his choice when he threw me out. I made mine when I left. Emily, please. I know he said terrible things. I know he hurt you, but he's your father, and he's lying in a hospital bed, unable to move half his body. Whatever he did, he doesn't deserve this. Doesn't he? The words came out harder than I intended. He told me I was dead to him, Mom. Because I'm engaged to a black man, because the person I love doesn't have the right skin color for him, and you stood there and let him say it. You didn't defend me. You didn't tell him he was wrong. You just watched while he destroyed our relationship. My mother was crying. I could hear it through the phone. I know. I was wrong. I should have stood up for you. But Emily, he's sick. He needs help. I can't do this alone. The medical bills, the rehabilitation, the daily care, it's too much. And he keeps trying to say your name. Even now, even after everything, he's asking for you. That detail struck me harder than I wanted to admit. My father, the man who'd screamed at me to get out, was now so broken that he could barely speak, and he was using what little speech he had to call for me. I need to think about it, I said. I'll call you back. I hung up before she could respond and stood in the hallway outside the conference room, my heart pounding. Through the glass, I could see my team still discussing the code review, completely unaware that my world had just tilted on its axis. That evening, I told Marcus about the call. We were in our apartment, the one we'd moved into together 3 weeks after I'd left my parents' house. It was small, but it was ours, decorated with things we'd chosen together, free from the weight of my father's disapproval. Marcus listened without interrupting, his face thoughtful. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I don't know. Part of me wants to say he made his bed, and now he can lie in it. He rejected me, rejected us, and now he's facing consequences. Why should I drop everything to help him?" That's a valid feeling. But another part of me remembers that he's my dad. He taught me to ride a bike. He helped me with my math homework. He drove me to college for my freshman year and cried when he hugged me goodbye. That person existed before the racist asshole who threw me out, and I don't know if I can just abandon him even after what he did. Marcus reached for my hand. Emily, whatever you decide, I'll support you. But I need you to know something. If you go back, if you help him, I'm not going to pretend I don't exist. I'm not going to make myself scarce, so your parents don't have to face the reality of who you love. If you're there, I'm there. We're a team. We're getting married in 6 months. I'm not hiding from your father's racism. I wouldn't ask you to. I know you wouldn't, but I also know how families work sometimes. They ask for just a little compromise, just a small concession, just this one time, and before you know it, you're back to being the person they wanted you to be instead of who you are. So if we do this, we do it on our terms. Your father gets help, but he also gets the reality of who we are. No hiding, no pretending, no acting like our relationship is something shameful. What Marcus said next would become the foundation for how we approached my father's crisis, and the boundaries we set would either force my father to confront his racism or prove that he was incapable of change. I think, Marcus continued, that if your father is going to recover, he needs to recover in a world that includes me. Because I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be your husband. I'm going to be part of your family, whether he likes it or not. And if he can't accept that, then maybe he doesn't deserve your help. I thought about that for the rest of the evening. Marcus was right. If I went back, if I helped my father, I couldn't do it by compartmentalizing my life. I couldn't be Emily the daughter when I was at my parents' house, and Emily the engaged woman the rest of the time. It had to be all of me, or none of me. The next day I called my mother back. "I'll help," I said, "but there are conditions." "Anything." "Emily, thank you. Your father will be so—" "Mom, listen to the conditions before you thank me. First, Marcus comes with me. He's my fiancé, and he's going to be around. If Dad has a problem with that, he can find someone else to help him. Second, I'm not moving back home. Marcus and I will visit. We'll help with rehabilitation and medical appointments, but we're not giving up our life to become Dad's full-time caregivers. Third, Dad needs to show genuine change, not just perform gratitude because he needs something. If he makes racist comments, if he treats Marcus with disrespect, if he acts like nothing happened, we're gone. No second chances." My mother was quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. Finally, she said, "Those are harsh terms, Emily." "They're fair terms. Dad made a choice 6 weeks ago. He chose racism over his daughter. Now he's facing the consequences of that choice. If he wants my help, he needs to prove he's willing to change. I'm not enabling his behavior by pretending everything is fine. He's paralyzed, Emily. He can barely speak. How is he supposed to prove anything? That's his challenge to figure out, not mine. I'm offering help with conditions. Take it or leave it." Another long silence. Then, "Okay, your father needs you too much for me to turn this down. When can you come?" "This weekend. Marcus and I will come Saturday morning. Have Dad's doctors prepared to meet with us so we understand his prognosis and care needs." I hung up and immediately felt the weight of what I'd committed to. I was going back to the house where I'd been rejected, bringing with me the man my father had hated on sight, and demanding that my father accept reality or face it alone. Marcus came home that evening to find me pacing the apartment, anxiety eating at me. "I called my mom," I said. "We're going Saturday." "Okay, how are you feeling?" "Terrified. What if I get there and all the old dynamics take over? What if my mom pressures me to be reasonable and I end up compromising everything we talked about? What if seeing my dad helpless breaks me down and I can't maintain boundaries?" Marcus pulled me into a hug. "Then I'll be there to remind you. Emily, you're not doing this alone. We're a team. When your mom tries to guilt you, when your dad tries to manipulate you, when you start to feel like you owe them something beyond what you're willing to give, I'll be right there. You don't have to be strong by yourself." Saturday morning came too, quickly. Marcus and I drove to my parents' house in silence, my anxiety building with every mile. The house looked the same as it had 6 weeks ago, a 3-bedroom colonial in a suburb where everyone's lawn was perfectly manicured and everyone's family looked exactly alike. White, middle class, conventional. I'd never quite fit, even before Marcus. I'd always been too independent, too career-focused, too unwilling to just accept the way things were. My mother met us at the door. She looked exhausted, older than I'd ever seen her. She hugged me tightly, then looked at Marcus with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not hostility, but not warmth either. Discomfort, maybe. Uncertainty about how to act. "Thank you for coming," she said to both of us, though her eyes were on me. "Your father is in the living room. The hospital released him yesterday with a home health aide who comes twice a day. He's not doing well, Emily. I need you to prepare yourself." We followed her inside. The house smelled the same, a mix of my mother's lavender air freshener and my father's coffee. But everything felt different, charged with tension and unspoken history. My father was in a hospital bed that had been set up in the living room, probably because he couldn't manage stairs anymore. He was propped up on pillows, his left side visibly slack, his face drooping on one side. When we entered, his eyes found me immediately, and I saw something I'd never seen in my father's face before. Fear. He tried to speak, his mouth working, but only garbled sounds came out. His right hand, the one that still worked, reached toward me weakly. I stood in the doorway, Marcus beside me, and looked at the man who'd told me to get out and never come back. He looked diminished, broken, nothing like the towering figure of rage who'd screamed at me 6 weeks ago. And despite everything, despite the hurt and anger I still carried, I felt a stab of pity. But pity wasn't the same as forgiveness, and I wasn't here to pretend the past hadn't happened. "Hi, Dad," I said, my voice neutral. "This is Marcus, my fiancé. We're here to help with your recovery, but we need to establish some ground rules first." My father's eyes moved to Marcus, and I watched for his reaction. I saw the recognition, saw him remembering the argument that had ended with me leaving, but I also saw something else, resignation maybe, or acceptance that he was in no position to object. What happened in the next 10 minutes would set the tone for my father's entire recovery, and whether I could maintain my boundaries would determine if he learned anything from the consequences of his choices or simply waited until he was strong enough to be cruel again. My mother looked uncomfortable. "Emily, maybe we should talk about the rules later. Your father just got home from the hospital yesterday. He's still adjusting." "No, Mom. We talk about this now. Before I do anything else, before I commit to helping, Dad needs to understand what I'm offering and what I'm not." I walked closer to the bed, Marcus staying by my side. My father's eyes followed us, his working hand clutching the blanket. "6 weeks ago," I said, speaking slowly and clearly, so there was no chance of misunderstanding, "you told me to get out and never come back. You said those words because I'm engaged to Marcus, because he's black, and because your racism was more important to you than your daughter. You threw me out of your life. You rejected me completely." My father made a sound that might have been protest or might have been acknowledgement. I couldn't tell. "I left. I blocked your numbers. I deleted you from my social media. I built a life without you because you made it very clear you didn't want to be part of mine, and now, 6 weeks later, you've had a stroke and you need help. Mom called me. She asked me to come back, and after thinking about it, I've decided to help you, but not unconditionally." My mother started to speak, but I held up a hand. "These are my terms. Marcus and I will help with your medical appointments, your rehabilitation, whatever you need to recover. We'll visit regularly. We'll coordinate with your doctors, but we're not moving in. We're not giving up our lives. And most importantly, you don't get to pretend Marcus doesn't exist. He's here. He's going to be here. He's going to be your son-in-law in 6 months. You can accept that reality, or you can find someone else to help you." I paused, watching my father's face. His eyes were watering. Whether from emotion or the physical effects of the stroke, I didn't know. If you make racist comments, if you treat Marcus with disrespect, if you act like you have any right to judge our relationship, we're done. We'll walk out and you'll never see us again. This is your one chance to be part of my life again, Dad. Not on your terms, on mine. Do you understand? My father's working hand moved, reaching for a notepad and pen that were on the bedside table. My mother quickly handed them to him. With shaking, clumsy movements, he wrote something and held it up. 2 words. I'm sorry. I looked at those words, written in my father's familiar handwriting made shaky by the stroke, and felt something crack in my chest, but I didn't let it show on my face. Sorry isn't enough, Dad. Sorry is what you say when you accidentally hurt someone. What you did was intentional. You chose racism over me. You chose hatred over your own child. And now you're sorry because you need something from me. That's not the kind of sorry that means anything. He wrote again, faster this time, the letters barely legible. Please help me. I am helping you. That's why I'm here. But helping you doesn't mean forgetting what you did. It doesn't mean pretending everything is fine. You're going to have to earn your way back into my life, Dad, slowly, by showing genuine change, by treating Marcus with respect, by proving that you understand why what you did was wrong. I turned to my mother. Where are his doctor's contacts? I want to set up a meeting to understand his care plan. My mother pulled out a folder of medical documents, clearly relieved to have something practical to focus on. Over the next hour, Marcus and I reviewed my father's medical situation. The stroke had been severe. He had left-side paralysis that might improve with intensive physical therapy, but might not. His speech was severely impaired, though the doctors thought he might regain some of it over time. He'd need help with basic activities of daily living, bathing, dressing, eating. He'd need someone to drive him to multiple appointments every week. The recovery would be long, difficult, and there was no guarantee he'd ever fully return to his previous functioning. It was overwhelming. I could see the exhaustion in my mother's face as she explained the daily routine, the medications, the exercises, the endless parade of specialists. She was in her 60s, not in great health herself, and the burden of my father's care was crushing her. How have you been managing? I asked her quietly, while my father dozed in his bed and Marcus made coffee in the kitchen. Barely, she admitted. The home health aide comes twice a day, but that's only 4 hours total. The rest of the time, it's just me. And Emily, I don't know how to do this. The physical therapy, the medical equipment, understanding what the doctors are saying, it's all too much. I'm so tired. I haven't slept more than 3 hours at a time in a week. Despite my anger at how she'd handled the situation 6 weeks ago, I felt sympathy for her. My mother wasn't a bad person. She was weak, too willing to go along with my father's views, too afraid to stand up to him. But she'd never been actively cruel. She'd just been passively complicit, which was its own kind of harm, but felt different from my father's active hatred. Marcus and I can take over coordinating the medical appointments, I said. We'll handle the doctors, the insurance, the therapy schedules. That's something we can do from our place. We'll also come by 3 times a week to check on things, make sure Dad's doing his exercises, talk to the home health aide. But Mom, you need to step up too. You need to support the boundaries I set. If Dad makes racist comments or treats Marcus badly, you can't ask me to overlook it or be patient. You need to back me up. My mother nodded, though she looked uncertain. He's going to have a hard time with this, Emily. He's from a different generation. He was raised with certain ideas. So were a lot of people from his generation, and they managed to change. Being old isn't an excuse for racism, and right now he's dependent on me and Marcus for help. If there was ever a time for him to examine his beliefs, this is it. Marcus returned with coffee for all of us. My mother accepted it with a murmured thanks, but I could see her discomfort with his presence in her kitchen, his familiarity with where things were kept. He'd been to this house maybe 5 times before the blow-up, always feeling my parents' subtle disapproval, their polite coldness. Now he was here as a necessary part of my father's recovery, and my mother didn't quite know how to process that. We stayed for 3 more hours, setting up a system for tracking medications, downloading apps to coordinate appointments, and talking through what needed to happen in the coming weeks. My father woke up periodically, his eyes following Marcus whenever he moved, but he didn't write anything else. He just watched, his expression unreadable through the stroke's effects. As we were leaving, my father reached out his working hand toward me, and what I did in response would either establish that I meant what I'd said about boundaries or signal that I could be pushed back into old patterns of accepting crumbs of affection in place of real change. I looked at his outstretched hand. Before the stroke, before the argument, I would have taken it automatically. I would have squeezed his hand and told him I loved him and everything would be okay. But that automatic affection had been built on a foundation of assumptions that he would always love me unconditionally, that family meant acceptance, that my father would support me no matter what. He'd shattered those assumptions when he threw me out. So I didn't take his hand. Instead, I said, "Dad, I'm here to help you recover. I'm here because despite what you did, I'm not willing to abandon you the way you abandoned me. But I'm not here to make you comfortable with your choices. When you're ready to do the real work of confronting your racism, when you're ready to treat Marcus with respect, when you've earned back the relationship you destroyed, then maybe we can have the kind of connection where I hold your hand. Until then, this is what you get. My help, but not my forgiveness." His eyes filled with tears. My mother made a small, distressed sound. Marcus stood quietly beside me, his presence a reminder of why I was doing this. We left, and I didn't look back. In the car, I started shaking. The adrenaline that had carried me through the visit drained away, leaving me exhausted and emotionally raw. "That was one of the hardest things I've ever done," I said. Marcus squeezed my hand. "You were incredible. You held your boundaries. You were clear about your expectations. And you didn't let guilt or pity override what you need from this situation." Did I go too far? Refusing to hold his hand? Was that cruel? It was honest. "Emily, your father is used to people doing what he wants, accepting his behavior, letting things slide because it's easier than confrontation. You're not doing that. You're making him face the consequences of his choices. That's not cruel. That's necessary." Over the next 2 weeks, we fell into a routine. Marcus and I visited Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evenings. We'd coordinate with the home health aide, check on my father's progress with physical therapy, and handle the endless medical logistics that came with his recovery. My mother seemed grateful, but also uncomfortable with the new dynamic where she wasn't in charge, where she had to follow my lead instead of my father's. My father's speech was slowly improving. He could manage short phrases now, though they were often slurred and difficult to understand. And what he chose to say with that limited speech told me a lot about where his mind was. "Thank you," he'd say to me when I arrived. "Water," when he was thirsty. "Tired," when he needed to rest. But never "I'm sorry" again. Never any acknowledgement of what had happened. Never any words directed at Marcus, though Marcus was in his house 3 times a week, helping manage the medical care that was keeping my father alive. I noticed, and I said nothing, waiting to see if my father would notice that his silence was its own form of disrespect. 3 weeks after we'd started helping, Marcus had to work late and couldn't come to one of our visits. My mother had immediately suggested we reschedule. "No," I said. "I'll come alone. The appointment with the neurologist is tomorrow, and we need to review his medications tonight." When I arrived without Marcus, I saw something shift in my father's face. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction that things were finally the way he wanted them. I sat down across from his hospital bed and said, "Marcus is working late. He'll be here on Friday like usual. Don't get any ideas that his absence is permanent." My father managed to say, "Easier without him." Those 3 words told me everything I needed to know. My father wasn't changing. He was tolerating. He was enduring Marcus's presence because he needed my help, but given the choice, he still wanted his daughter without the black fiancé attached. Easier for who, Dad? For you? Because you don't have to face the reality of your racism when Marcus isn't here? You're right, it probably is easier for you, but it's not easier for me. It's not easier for the person I love who has to know that my father can barely stand to be in the same room with him. My father tried to respond, but I held up my hand. You have 10 months until our wedding, 10 months to decide if you're going to be there or if you're going to miss your only daughter getting married because you can't get past the color of her fiancé's skin. And I need you to understand something. I'm not postponing my wedding. I'm not changing my plans. I'm not hoping you'll magically be okay with this by then. You either do the work to change or you miss one of the most important days of my life. Those are your options. What my father did in response to that ultimatum would determine whether he was capable of growth or if I was wasting my time trying to rehabilitate a relationship with a man who would always value his prejudice over his daughter. My father's working hand gripped the blanket, his face flushed with what might have been anger or frustration or shame. He struggled to form words, his mouth working, and finally managed, "Can't change who I am." And there it was, the admission I'd been dreading and expecting in equal measure. My father couldn't change who he was, wouldn't, more accurately, because change would require him to admit he was wrong, and my father had built his entire identity on being right, on his opinions being correct, on his way of seeing the world being the only acceptable way. Then I can't change who I am either, Dad, and who I am is a woman who loves Marcus and is going to marry him regardless of your approval. So, I guess we're at an impasse. I stood up to leave. My father made a sound of distress, his hand reaching out. My mother, who'd been hovering in the doorway, rushed in. "Emily, please. He's still recovering. He's confused. He doesn't mean—" "Yes, he does, Mom. He means it. He'd rather miss my wedding than examine why he thinks Marcus is less than because of his skin color. That's his choice, and he's making it clearly. You're being unreasonable. You're asking him to change everything about how he thinks. I'm asking him to treat the man I love with basic human decency. That's not unreasonable. That's the bare minimum. And if he can't meet that minimum, then what exactly are we doing here? Why am I helping someone who refuses to accept the most important person in my life?" I left, and this time I didn't schedule the next visit. I told my mother I needed space to think about whether continuing to help was worth the emotional cost if my father wasn't willing to do any work on his end. Marcus found me that night sitting on our couch, staring at nothing. He said he can't change who he is, I told him. After 3 weeks of me helping him, of us reorganizing our lives to support his recovery, he's still making it clear that he tolerates you at best and hates you at worst. Marcus sat beside me. "What do you want to do?" "I want to walk away. I want to tell them to figure it out themselves, but he's your father. But he's my father, and I keep thinking about those moments when I was a kid, before I understood about racism and prejudice, when he was just Dad, the person who made me feel safe, and I don't know how to reconcile that dad with this one. Maybe you can't reconcile them. Maybe they're different people, and the one from your childhood doesn't exist anymore, or maybe he always existed and you just didn't see him until his hatred collided with your life." We sat in silence for a while. Then Marcus said something that changed how I was thinking about the situation. "Emily, I don't think you should stop helping your father." I looked at him in surprise. "What? After everything he's said, after how he treats you?" "I think you should keep helping him, but I think you should stop waiting for him to change." "I don't understand." "You're helping him because you believe that if you're patient enough, if you maintain boundaries strongly enough, if you model the right behavior, he'll eventually see the light and realize his racism is wrong. But what if he doesn't? What if he never has that revelation? Are you going to feel like you wasted your time?" "Maybe." "Or," Marcus continued, You could help him because it's the right thing to do, regardless of whether it changes him. You help him because you're a good daughter, not because he's a good father. You help him because you have the capacity to be compassionate even to people who've hurt you. And you do it with clear boundaries, not out of hope for reconciliation, but out of your own values. That way, his refusal to change becomes his loss, not yours. I thought about that. It was a different framework entirely, one that took my father's potential change out of the equation and focused on my own integrity instead. But how do I do that without letting him walk all over me? Without teaching him that his behavior is acceptable? You do it exactly like you've been doing it. You maintain boundaries. You insist on respect for me and for us. You don't pretend everything is fine, but you stop making your help conditional on him becoming someone different. You help him as he is, a racist who needs medical care, and you do it because that's who you are, not who he is. It was a subtle but important shift in thinking. And over the next few weeks, I tried to approach it that way. I went back to helping my father, but I stopped looking for signs of change. I stopped hoping each visit would be the one where he finally got it. I just showed up, did what needed to be done, and left. And something interesting happened. Without my expectations weighing on him, without me constantly pushing for growth he wasn't ready for, my father seemed to relax slightly. He still didn't engage with Marcus much, but his hostility seemed to fade into something more like resigned acceptance. 2 months after the stroke, my father was able to say full sentences again, though his speech was still slow and effortful. His physical therapy was progressing, though the doctors said he'd likely never regain full use of his left side. And one evening, when Marcus and I were there helping my mother understand some new medical equipment, my father said something that made us all freeze. "Marcus," he said, his voice labored but clear, "thank you for helping me." It was the first time my father had directly addressed Marcus since we'd started coming back. Marcus looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "You're welcome, Mr. Carter." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a recognition of wrongdoing. It wasn't the transformation I'd hoped for. But it was something. A crack in the wall. An acknowledgement that Marcus was a person worthy of thanks. I didn't make a big deal about it. I just continued reviewing the medical equipment with my mother. But later, in the car, I allowed myself to feel a small amount of hope. "He said thank you. To you?" I said to Marcus. "He did. That's progress, right?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "It's something. But Emily, don't make it bigger than it is. He thanked me for helping him. That doesn't mean he's okay with us getting married. That doesn't mean he's confronted his racism. It just means he's capable of basic politeness when someone is literally helping keep him alive." "I know, but it's more than he's done before." "That's true. Just be careful about reading too much into it. Your father's changed his behavior because his circumstances forced him to. That's not the same as choosing to change because he believes it's right." What would happen over the next 3 months would test whether my father's growing civility toward Marcus was genuine growth or strategic survival, and the choice he'd make about my wedding would reveal which it was. Over the next 3 months, a pattern developed that I could only describe as cautious coexistence. My father's physical condition continued to improve slowly. He could walk short distances with a cane, though his left leg dragged. His speech was clearer, though he tired easily from the effort, and his interactions with Marcus evolved from hostile silence to uncomfortable politeness. But politeness wasn't acceptance, and I was acutely aware that my father's improved behavior toward Marcus coincided exactly with his dependence on us for help, which meant I had no way of knowing if any of this was real or if he was simply doing what he needed to do to keep his daughter in his life. 4 months after the stroke, my father said something that made me realize how carefully he'd been calculating his words. We were at my parents' house for our usual Wednesday visit. Marcus was in the kitchen helping my mother with dinner while I helped my father with his evening medications. As I handed him his pills, he said, "Marcus is helpful." "He is," I agreed neutrally. Good with the medical equipment, smart about the insurance. Yes. My father struggled for a moment, then managed. You chose someone capable. I stopped what I was doing and looked at him directly. Dad, are you trying to give Marcus a compliment? I'm saying he's not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone lazy? Someone unintelligent? Someone who fit the racist stereotypes you had in your head? My father's face flushed. That's not fair, isn't it? You threw me out because I'm marrying a black man. You had exactly zero interest in knowing anything about Marcus as a person. You made judgments based purely on his skin color, so forgive me if I'm skeptical when you now say he's not what you expected. I'm trying, my father said, and there was frustration in his voice. I'm trying to be better. Why can't you see that? Because trying means examining why you were wrong in the first place. Trying means apologizing for the harm you caused. Trying means actually saying the words, I was racist, and that was wrong. You're not trying to be better, Dad. You're trying to be comfortable while maintaining your worldview. And I'm not going to congratulate you for basic civility toward the man I'm going to marry. My father's jaw tightened. You want me to grovel, to say I was a monster. I want you to acknowledge reality. You threw me out because of racism. That happened. You can't recover from that by pretending it was some other thing, some misunderstanding or overreaction. It was racism, pure and simple. And until you can say that out loud, nothing else you say matters. We sat in tense silence for a moment. Then my father said quietly, I was raised to believe certain things. My father believed them. His father believed them. It's not easy to just change. I know it's not easy. That's why it's called growth. But Dad, think about what you're telling me. You're saying that 3 generations of racism in our family is an excuse for you to keep being racist. That's not a defense. That's an argument for why you need to work even harder to break the cycle. Before my father could respond, Marcus and my mother came in with dinner. The conversation ended, but I could see my father turning it over in his mind, his expression troubled. That night, Marcus asked me how I thought things were going. Honestly, I don't know. He's better than he was, but I can't tell if it's real change or just performance. And I'm tired of analyzing every word he says, trying to figure out if he means it or if he's just managing me. Do you need to figure it out? What do you mean? I mean, maybe his motivations don't matter as much as his behavior. If he treats me with respect, if he doesn't make racist comments, if he shows up for you in meaningful ways, does it matter if deep down he still wishes you'd married someone white? Doesn't it? Marcus considered this. I guess what I'm asking is, what's your standard for reconciliation? Does he need to become actively anti-racist? Does he need to apologize perfectly? Does he need to love me? Or does he just need to treat us with basic decency and not actively harm our relationship? I don't know. I've been so focused on him changing his beliefs that I haven't really thought about what I'd actually accept as enough. What I would decide as my standard for my father's redemption would determine whether we could rebuild our relationship or if I'd spend the rest of my life feeling like his reformation was incomplete no matter what he did. Over the next few weeks, I thought a lot about what enough looked like, and I realized that Marcus had a point. I'd been waiting for my father to have some dramatic moment of realization, some perfect apology that would undo all the hurt. But real life didn't work that way. People changed incrementally, imperfectly, with backslides and struggles. Maybe what I needed from my father wasn't perfection. Maybe it was just genuine effort and sustained behavioral change, even if his internal beliefs took longer to catch up. 5 months after the stroke, my father asked to speak with me alone. Marcus and my mother made themselves scarce, giving us privacy in the living room. I've been thinking, my father said, his speech much improved now, though still slower than before the stroke. About what you said, about acknowledging what I did. I waited, not wanting to interrupt. It's hard for me to say this, not because I don't believe it, but because saying it means admitting I was wrong about something fundamental, that I hurt you in a way that can't be undone. Dad, let me finish, please. He took a breath. When you told me you were marrying Marcus, I reacted badly. I said things that came from a place of prejudice, of racism. I threw you out because I couldn't handle that you'd chosen someone who didn't fit what I thought your life should look like, and that was wrong. He paused, and I saw how difficult this was for him, how much it cost to say these words. I was raised to believe certain things about race, about people who look different from me, and I never questioned those beliefs because everyone around me believed them too. But that's not an excuse. It's an explanation, but it's not an excuse. I should have questioned them. I should have been better, and I hurt you because I wasn't. Tears were running down my face now. This was more than my father had said about any of this since the stroke. It was more vulnerability than I'd seen from him in years. I can't promise I'm going to be perfect, he continued. I can't promise I won't say something wrong or think something I shouldn't. This stuff it's ingrained. It's going to take time, but I'm trying. Not because I need you, though I do, but because you deserve a father who sees you fully, who honors your choices, who treats the person you love with respect. And I want to be that father, even if I don't know how yet. I didn't know what to say. This was the acknowledgement I'd been waiting for, and it felt both like too much and not enough simultaneously. Thank you for saying that, I finally managed. That means a lot to me. But Dad, I need you to understand something. Words are important, but actions matter more. I need to see sustained change. I need to see you treating Marcus like family, not like an obligation. And I need to know that if you mess up, you'll own it and try to do better, not make excuses or expect me to just accept it. I understand, and I know I have a long way to go, but I want to try, if you'll let me. I'll let you. I've been letting you this whole time, but my standards haven't changed. You be respectful, you work on yourself, you show genuine effort, and I'll keep showing up. But if you go back to how things were, if this was just something you said to keep me around, we're done. Permanently. My father nodded. I understand. When Marcus and my mother came back, I told them about the conversation. Marcus looked thoughtful. My mother looked relieved. Do you believe him? Marcus asked me later in the car. I think I believe he wants to change. Whether he can actually do it is a different question, but it's more than I had before. How do you feel about it? Hopeful and scared. Hopeful that maybe we can actually rebuild something real. Scared that I'm setting myself up for disappointment. The real test came 2 weeks later when Marcus and I went to dinner at my parents' house. It was the first time we'd stayed for a full meal, rather than just stopping by to help with medical tasks. My mother had made pot roast, and the four of us sat around the dining room table in a configuration that would have been impossible 6 months ago. The conversation was stilted at first, everyone hyper-aware of the significance of this moment, but gradually things relaxed. My father asked Marcus about his work as a civil engineer. Marcus asked my father about his physical therapy progress. My mother told stories about her book club. I watched the whole thing with a mix of gratitude and guardedness, waiting for the moment when it would all fall apart. It didn't fall apart. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward pauses, moments when I could see my father struggling with what to say, times when the conversation veered too close to dangerous territory and someone quickly redirected. But we got through dinner. We even shared dessert and coffee afterward. As Marcus and I were leaving, my father said, "Thank you for coming, both of you. This meant a lot to your mother and me." It was such a normal thing to say, the kind of thing any parent might say at the end of a family dinner. But for us, it was monumental. My father had acknowledged Marcus's presence as part of what made the evening meaningful. He'd included him in the thanks. It was a small thing, but it mattered. What would happen at my next doctor's appointment would show whether my father's changes were surface level or if he was actually willing to stand up for us in front of others, and his response would either prove his growth was real or reveal it as performance. 3 weeks before our wedding, Marcus and I went to a final appointment with the cardiologist who was monitoring my father's heart health post-stroke. My mother had asked us to accompany them because the medical information was complex and she wanted help understanding it. The appointment was going well until another patient in the waiting room, an older white man my father seemed to know from somewhere, struck up a conversation. "Robert, haven't seen you since the stroke. How are you managing?" "Better," my father said. "Got good help. My daughter and her fiancé have been managing all the medical coordination." The man looked at Marcus and me, and I saw something shift in his expression. "Your daughter and her fiancé. Well, that's nice that they're helping out." The pause before fiancé, the tone when he said it, made it clear what he thought about our relationship. I felt Marcus tense beside me. My father didn't miss it either, and what he did next would tell me everything about whether the past months had meant anything. "Yes," my father said, his voice stronger than I'd heard it in months. "Marcus has been invaluable. He's organized, intelligent, and he's been incredibly patient with all of us during my recovery. My daughter is lucky to have found someone so capable." The other man's smile became fixed. "I see. Well, good for you for being so modern about things." "Modern," my father repeated. "Is that what we're calling basic decency now? Marcus is going to be my son-in-law in 3 weeks. He's family, and I don't appreciate whatever it is you're implying." The waiting room had gone quiet. Everyone was watching this exchange. The other man's face reddened. "I wasn't implying anything, Robert, just making conversation." "Then let me be clear. My daughter is marrying a man I respect and admire. If you have a problem with that, we don't need to continue this conversation." The man muttered something about needing to check in for his appointment and walked away. My mother looked shocked, Marcus looked stunned, and I felt something in my chest that I hadn't felt in 6 months, pride in my father. After the appointment, as we walked to our cars, my father said, "I'm sorry about that." "You don't need to apologize," I said. "You didn't do anything wrong. You actually did something really right. I should have done it months ago, years ago, if I'm being honest. I should have been defending you both from the start, not being the person you needed defending from." In the car afterward, Marcus was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "Your dad stood up for us." He did, in public, in front of someone who clearly judged him for it. He chose us over his comfort. "I know. That's not nothing, Emily." "No, it's not. It wasn't everything, but it was something significant." My father had moved from tolerating our relationship in private to defending it in public. That was the kind of change that couldn't be faked or performed. That was real. The week before the wedding, my father asked if he could talk to Marcus alone. Marcus agreed, though he looked nervous about what my father might say. They were in my parents' living room for almost an hour. When they came out, both looked emotionally wrung out, but not upset. Marcus said he'd tell me about it later. That night, in our apartment, Marcus explained what had happened. "Your father apologized to me, directly. He said he was sorry for how he'd treated me, for the assumptions he'd made, for the prejudice he'd shown. He said he knows he can't undo the harm, but he wants to try to be better. He asked if I could forgive him, not for his sake, but for yours, so that you could have your father at your wedding without carrying all that pain." "What did you say?" "I told him I appreciated the apology, that I could see he was trying to change, but I also told him that forgiveness isn't automatic, that it's something that has to be earned through sustained action over time, that I'm willing to move forward, to build a relationship with him, but I'm not going to pretend the past didn't happen." "How did he take that?" "Better than I expected. He said he understood, that he doesn't expect instant forgiveness. He just wanted me to know he was sorry and that he's committed to being better." I thought about this. Do you believe him? I think I do. Emily, 6 months ago, your father couldn't even say my name. Now he's apologizing to me directly and defending our relationship to other people. That's real change. It's not complete change, and I'm sure he's still got work to do on his beliefs, but it's real. What happened at my wedding would test whether my father's transformation could survive the scrutiny of extended family and community, and whether he'd be willing to publicly celebrate our marriage or retreat back into his prejudices when faced with judgment from people who thought like his old self. Our wedding was small, about 60 people, held at a local botanical garden. We'd chosen the venue because it was beautiful and because it felt neutral, not tied to either of our family's churches or communities. We wanted a space that belonged to us, not to anyone's expectations. The week before the wedding, my mother called me in a panic. "Emily, your Aunt Carol called. She heard about Marcus, and she said she's not coming to the wedding. And your Uncle Bill said the same thing. And your father's brother Tom, he said something about not wanting to be part of this kind of thing." I felt the familiar anger rising. "Okay, then they don't come. We don't need people at our wedding who don't support our marriage." "But Emily, they're family. Your father is devastated. He's trying to convince them." "Mom, stop. I don't want Dad convincing anyone to come to my wedding. Either they want to be there or they don't. I'm not interested in people showing up out of obligation while silently judging us. If they're racist, they can stay home." "They're not racist. They have traditional values." "Traditional values is code for racism, Mom, and I'm done pretending otherwise. Tell Dad to stop calling them. The people who want to be there will be there. That's enough." When I told Marcus about it, he sighed. "I'm sorry. I know you wanted your whole family there." "I wanted the family I thought I had, but maybe the family I actually have is smaller than I thought, and maybe that's okay." The day of the wedding arrived. I was nervous about seeing who would show up, who would choose to be there, and who wouldn't. As I got ready in the bridal suite, my mother gave me updates. "Your cousin Jennifer is here, and your friend Sarah from college. Marcus's family is here. They seem lovely. And Emily, your father, he's in his suit. He's been crying. Happy crying, I think. He wants to walk you down the aisle if you'll let him." I'd been uncertain about this. The tradition of a father giving away his daughter felt loaded even without our history. But I'd left it as an open option, telling my father he could walk with me if he wanted to, that I'd make the final decision the day of the wedding. I looked at myself in the mirror, in my dress, and thought about everything that had happened in the past 6 months. My father had thrown me out. Then he'd needed me, and I'd come back. And slowly, imperfectly, with backslides and struggles, he'd tried to change. He'd apologized. He'd defended us. He'd worked on himself in ways I'd never thought possible. He wasn't perfect. His transformation wasn't complete, but it was real. "Tell Dad I'd be honored if he walked with me, I said. The ceremony was beautiful. As I walked down the aisle with my father, his cane in one hand and my arm in his other, I saw the faces of the people who'd chosen to be there. Not everyone I'd invited had come, but the people who were there were the ones who mattered, the ones who celebrated our love instead of judging it. My father's speech at the reception surprised everyone, including me. He stood up slowly, leaning on his cane, and the room went quiet. "I'm going to say something that's hard for me to say," he began. 6 months ago, when Emily told me she was marrying Marcus, I reacted badly, very badly. I said things that were rooted in prejudice and fear, things I'm deeply ashamed of now. I threw my daughter out of my life because I couldn't see past my own narrow view of how the world should work. The room was completely silent. People were uncomfortable, unsure where this was going. And then I had a stroke, and I found myself needing help from the daughter I'd rejected and the man I'd refused to accept. And they came. They didn't have to, but they did. And over these past months, Marcus has shown me what kind of person he is. not through his skin color, which is what I stupidly focused on before, but through his actions, his character, his love for my daughter. My father's voice was shaking now. I'm standing here today as a man who was given a second chance I didn't deserve. Emily and Marcus could have left me to face the consequences of my hatred alone. Instead, they showed me compassion and gave me the opportunity to be better. And I want everyone here to know that I'm proud of my daughter. I'm grateful for Marcus, and I'm honored to welcome him into our family. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. My father sat down, exhausted from the effort of the speech. Marcus stood up and crossed the room to shake his hand, then pulled him into a brief hug. Later, during the reception, I found my father sitting at a table, watching people dance. "That speech," I said, sitting beside him. "Thank you." I meant every word. Emily, I know I've got more work to do. I know one speech doesn't erase 6 months or a lifetime of wrong thinking, but I want you to know I'm committed to the work. Not because I had a stroke and learned a lesson, but because you deserve a father who truly sees you and honors your choices. I know you are, and I'm proud of you too, Dad, for being willing to change, for doing the hard work, for showing up today and saying those things publicly. We sat together in comfortable silence, watching Marcus dance with my mother, both of them laughing. It wasn't the relationship I'd imagined having with my father. It was scarred by what had happened, marked by the pain of those months. But it was real. It was honest. And it was built on a foundation of genuine change rather than pretense. What would happen in the year after my wedding would show whether my father's transformation was sustainable or if the work of changing deeply held beliefs was too much to maintain once the immediate crisis of his stroke had passed and life returned to normal. A year after our wedding, Marcus and I hosted Thanksgiving at our new house. We'd bought it 6 months earlier, a small 3-bedroom in a diverse neighborhood that felt like home in a way my childhood house never had. We invited my parents. It was the first major holiday since the wedding, and I was nervous about how it would go. My father's health had continued to improve. He still used a cane, but he was much more mobile. His speech was almost back to normal, and his relationship with Marcus had evolved into something that looked like genuine affection. But I was still waiting for the other shoe to drop, for some sign that the change hadn't been real or sustainable. My parents arrived early to help with cooking. My mother immediately took over the kitchen in that way mothers do, convinced that I couldn't possibly manage a turkey on my own. My father and Marcus ended up in the living room, and I could hear them talking about the football game on TV, arguing about whether the Patriots had a chance this season. It was so normal, so unremarkably normal, and that normalcy felt like a miracle. During dinner, my father said grace. It was something he'd always done at family meals, a tradition I'd assumed would feel awkward now, but his prayer surprised me. Lord, thank you for this food and for the hands that prepared it. Thank you for this family, for the love that binds us even when we've been broken. Thank you for second chances and for people who are willing to offer forgiveness even when it's not deserved. Thank you for Emily and Marcus, for their home, for their marriage, for the life they're building together. Help me to be worthy of being part of that life. Amen. After dinner, my father pulled me aside. I wanted to tell you something. I've been going to a support group for people working to unlearn racism. It's through our church. The pastor started it after my speech at your wedding apparently inspired some other people to examine their own beliefs. You're in a support group? Every Tuesday evening for the past 4 months. It's hard. Listening to other people talk about how they've hurt people with their prejudice, examining my own patterns of thinking, learning about systemic racism and how I've benefited from it. But it's important, and it's helping me understand that changing isn't just about treating Marcus well. It's about understanding the bigger picture of how racism works and my role in it. I hugged him, tears in my eyes. I'm so proud of you, Dad. I'm proud of me, too, which is a strange thing to say, being proud of myself for doing what I should have been doing all along. But I guess that's part of growth, recognizing progress even when it's progress toward a basic standard of human decency. As the evening wound down and my parents prepared to leave, my father shook Marcus's hand at the door, then pulled him into a hug. "Thank you for giving an old fool a chance to be better," he said. "Thank you for taking that chance seriously," Marcus replied. After they left, Marcus and I cleaned up the kitchen together. "Your dad's really changed," Marcus observed. "He has. It's been a year and a half since the stroke, and he's still putting in the work. Going to that support group, reading books about racism, actively working to be better. That's not performance. That's real commitment. How do you feel about it?" "Grateful, and a little sad, if I'm honest. Sad that it took a stroke, and me leaving for him to examine his beliefs. Sad about the time we lost, but mostly grateful that we got here at all, even if the path was hard." "Do you think you've forgiven him?" I thought about it. I think forgiveness has been happening gradually, in small moments. Each time he does something that shows he's genuinely changed, I forgive him a little more. It's not one big moment of absolution. It's hundreds of small choices to move forward, and I'm okay with that. My father threw me out of his life because I fell in love with a black man. He chose racism over his daughter, hatred over love. When he had a stroke weeks later and needed the help of the daughter he'd rejected and the man he'd despised, I made a choice to help him, but with strict boundaries and clear expectations that he would have to change if he wanted to be part of my life. That change didn't happen overnight. It was messy, imperfect, filled with backslides and struggles, but it was real. Through sustained effort, public accountability, and genuine work on his beliefs, my father transformed from the man who screamed, "Get out and never come back," to the man who welcomed my husband into our family with an open heart. The stroke didn't teach him to be better. Facing the consequences of his choices taught him to be better. And choosing to do the hard work of change, even when it was uncomfortable, taught him that love is worth more than prejudice. If Emily's story of setting boundaries with a racist parent and watching genuine transformation happen resonated with you, hit that like button. My favorite moment was when her father publicly defended her relationship in the doctor's waiting room, showing that his change was real enough to stand up to judgment from others. What was yours? Drop it in the comments. And if you've ever had to choose between maintaining a relationship with someone who hurt you or setting boundaries that protect your peace, remember that you can offer people chances to change without sacrificing yourself in the process. Subscribe for more stories about families that break and rebuild and the hard work of genuine transformation.